we're seeing the same trend really internationally as well, in terms of that misclassification of workers and the way in which the true costs of employment, the savings that have been made by misclassification of workers, those savings have been privatized. And of course, now all the costs that come from that misclassification are now being socialized into society, and it'll be the other taxpayers that end up paying for those unemployment benefits that are so necessary. And that's now a much more generalized than, although it started much of it in the United States, it's gone much wider. But I wanted to come on to say, looking internationally at these issues, the pandemic has really exposed and exacerbated the fundamental and unsustainable scale of inequality that now exists between most companies and their workers. And that's perhaps best exemplified in the global supply chains and the treatment of workers in those global supply chains that now spread around the world, and where that relationship is ubiquitous. I think, to take one stark example of, say, Bangladesh at the moment, the apparel industry there, we've already had 2 million workers in Bangladesh laid off, mainly women workers, a lot of them migrants coming from other parts, rural parts of Bangladesh, to work in that industry. Yesterday, we had hunger protests in Dhaka because of those workers being left, not only laid off, but essentially abandoned. Now, why is that? It's abandoned because the fast fashion brands that have relied so heavily on production in Bangladesh, as well as in Cambodia and increasingly in Myanmar, those same brands have essentially cancelled their orders. Half of the manufacturers in Bangladesh now report that the bulk of their orders have been cancelled. Now, a significant number of those fast fashion brands have cancelled the orders summarily, like C&A. Urban Outfitters has used the force majeure clause in its contracts to say, we're not only cancelling, but we won't pay for anything that you've manufactured. Gap is asking for a discount on the goods that have already been shipped. Now, the margins for suppliers are already tiny, so any cut there is passed immediately down to the lowest and most vulnerable and poorest part of that supply chain, which is the women workers, on which the whole industry depends in terms of their work. We've also seen payment terms being shifted from 90 days to 120 days. But it's critical that we also see that there are companies that are following a different pattern, even though they're a small cluster of leading companies. But H&M and Inditex are at least guaranteeing to pay for what's been manufactured for them and is in shipment. The L'Oreal, for instance, is saying that they will shorten their payment times because of the distress of their suppliers. And Unilever has made a similar pledge to support their suppliers that are in financial distress through a 500 million euro scheme. So there are those that are doing the right thing in this place, but the vast majority are not. And those global supply chains, we're seeing vast amounts of suffering emerging very rapidly. The people in those supply chains and the consumers who use those goods and the investors in those companies will remember which companies have done the right thing and which have done the wrong.